The air wobbled like jelly, distorting the horizon and making it difficult to distinguish reality from illusion. The heat was relentless, an oppressive force that seemed to press down from all directions. Heat made the ground look wavy in the distance, creating mirages that danced and shimmered, tempting the weary traveler with false promises of water and shade. This wasn't just any desert. Nope. This was a massive wasteland stretching as far as the eye could see, an endless sea of sand dunes and rocky outcrops, devoid of life and mercy, a forgotten part of a forgotten planet, baking under a super-hot sun, the kind of place that stories warned about, where only the brave or the foolish dared to tread.
2 weeks. 2 weeks since the crash. 2 weeks in this awful place. Each day felt like an eternity, the sun's unyielding glare a constant reminder of their dire situation.
Sergeant John Riley squinted, his eyes hurting from sweat and sand. The fine grains had a way of getting into everything, irritating his skin and making every movement a chore. He shifted his backpack, the rough material rubbing against his sunburnt neck. The weight of it was a constant burden, but it held the essentials for survival: water, rations, and a few precious tools. A low growl came from behind him, not the growl of a hungry animal, but something different. It was a sound that sent a shiver down his spine, even in the scorching heat. He turned, his hand going straight to the plasma pistol on his hip. The weapon was a comforting weight, a reminder that he wasn't entirely defenseless in this hostile environment. 2 figures stood out against the bright light. Tall and thin, they looked human-like, but definitely alien. Their presence was both a mystery and a potential threat. Their skin, a light purple, seemed to shimmer in the harsh sun. It was almost mesmerizing, a stark contrast to the dull, sandy landscape around them. Big black eyes looked at him with a mix of caution and curiosity. They seemed to be studying him, assessing whether he was a friend or foe. This desert was dangerous everywhere, he knew that now. But these weren't a threat, not yet anyway. He had to be careful, though. In a place like this, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Riley scanned the horizon, looking for any signs of movement. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. His grip tightened on the plasma pistol. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent standoff between him and the unknown. The aliens took a few cautious steps forward, their movements slow and deliberate. They seemed to be trying to communicate, but Riley couldn't understand their gestures. He lowered his weapon slightly, a tentative gesture of peace. He didn't want to provoke them, not when he was so outnumbered and out of his element. The aliens exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. It was clear they were deciding what to do next. Riley stood his ground, waiting. This desert had thrown many challenges his way, but this encounter was unlike anything he had faced before. An uneasy alliance was forming, one that could mean the difference between life and death in the sun-scorched sands.
Water. The most precious resource in this barren land. A shimmering promise of life amidst the endless sea of sand.
Riley croaked, the word hard to say with his dry throat. His lips were cracked and his voice barely a whisper, a testament to the harshness of the desert. He held up an empty water bottle, a sign anyone could understand. The bottle, once a vessel of hope, now a symbol of their dire situation. The taller alien tilted her head, a quiet chirp coming from her lips. Her lavender skin glistened under the harsh sun, and her large, expressive eyes conveyed a depth of understanding. It wasn't human speech, not really, but he could see understanding in her eyes. Those large black eyes seemed to hold a universe of empathy, a silent promise of help. She pointed south, her movement smooth and graceful. The gesture was almost poetic, a dance in the midst of desolation. There, between 2 tall rocks, a bit of green promised something other than death. The sight of the oasis was like a mirage, a beacon of hope in the endless desert. Riley nodded, a little bit of hope growing in his chest. The thought of water, of relief, was almost too good to be true. He wasn't alone in this fight. The aliens, once strangers, were now his companions, their shared struggle forging an unspoken bond. The journey was really tough. Each step was a battle against the scorching heat, the unforgiving terrain testing their resolve. The sand, burning hot during the day, was hard to walk on. It felt like walking on a bed of coals, each grain of sand a tiny ember. Riley watched his companions move over the difficult ground with amazing grace. Their movements were fluid, almost as if they were gliding over the sand. They moved smoothly, their bare feet not bothered by the hot sand. It was as if they were one with the desert, their bodies adapted to their harsh environment. As the sun started to go down, making the sky orange and purple, they reached the oasis. The colours of the sunset painted the sky in hues of hope and promise. A small pool of water shimmered, a sign of life in the empty landscape. The water was a precious jewel in the midst of the barren desert. Riley knelt down, scooping the cool water into his hands. The sensation of the water against his skin was a relief, a moment of pure bliss. He drank a lot, the water making his dry throat feel better. Each gulp was a reminder of life, a promise of survival in this strange land. Night brought a different kind of danger. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the desert transformed. The once blistering heat gave way to a bone-chilling cold, a stark reminder of the desert's dual nature. The temperature plummeted rapidly, and the vast expanse of sand and rock seemed to come alive with the whispers of the night. The burning heat was gone, replaced by a freezing cold. The soldiers, who had been sweating under the relentless sun just hours before, now found themselves shivering. The cold was biting, seeping through their clothes and into their bones. It was a cold that seemed to carry with it the weight of the unknown, the promise of unseen threats lurking in the shadows. They huddled together for warmth, a small fire their only protection against the dark. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows on their faces. It was a fragile barrier, a tiny beacon of light in the vast oppressive darkness of the desert night. The soldiers' faces were tense, their eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. A rustling sound came from the darkness. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder, more insistent. The sound was unsettling, like the whisper of dry leaves being blown by the wind, but there was no wind. The desert was eerily still, and the rustling seemed to come from all directions at once.
What was that? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances, their hands instinctively moving to their weapons. The rustling grew louder, closer, and the sense of impending danger became almost palpable.
Riley tensed up, his hand going to his weapon, his heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in his ears. He scanned the darkness, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, but it was elusive, always just beyond the reach of the firelight. The aliens, their senses much better than his, were already standing. Their movements were fluid, almost graceful as they positioned themselves around the fire. Their eyes, large and reflective, seemed to pierce the darkness, searching for the unseen threat. They communicated in low, urgent tones, their voices a strange mix of clicks and hisses. Their eyes, black as night in the firelight, looked around the shadows. The firelight reflected off their eyes, giving them an eerie, almost otherworldly glow. They moved with a purpose, their bodies tense and ready for action. It was clear that they were familiar with the dangers of the desert night. A high-pitched screech broke the silence. It was a sound that sent chills down their spines, a sound that spoke of predatory intent. The screech was followed by a series of clicks and hisses, a cacophony of noise that seemed to come from all around them. The soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons, their eyes wide with fear. From the darkness, a bunch of creatures rushed forward. They moved with terrifying speed, their bodies a blur of motion. The firelight caught glimpses of their forms, revealing hard, chitinous shells and multiple legs. They were small, but their numbers made them a formidable threat. Not big, but lots of them. The sheer number of creatures was overwhelming. They swarmed towards the soldiers, their movements coordinated and relentless. The ground seemed to writhe and shift under the weight of their bodies, a living carpet of menace. Their bodies, covered in hard shells and spider-like legs, shone in the moonlight. The moonlight glinted off their exoskeletons, giving them an almost metallic sheen. Their legs moved with a mechanical precision, carrying them swiftly across the sand. They were creatures of the night, perfectly adapted to their environment. Riley started shooting, his plasma pistol firing bolts of energy. The bright flashes of the plasma bolts lit up the night, momentarily illuminating the creatures. The shots hit their marks, but the creatures were resilient, their hard shells absorbing much of the impact. Riley's heart raced as he continued to fire, trying to hold back the advancing swarm. The creatures, quick and nimble, dodged the shots. They moved with an agility that was almost supernatural, darting and weaving to avoid the plasma bolts. It was like trying to hit shadows, their movements too fast to track. Riley's frustration grew as he realized that they were outmatched. He felt a sharp tug on his arm. It was a sudden, forceful pull that nearly knocked him off his feet. He turned to see one of the aliens, her eyes wide with urgency, pulling him away from the fire. The message was clear. They needed to retreat.
"We have to go, now." The urgency in the voice was unmistakable. The soldiers began to move, their training kicking in as they formed a defensive line. They backed away from the fire, their eyes never leaving the advancing creatures.
The taller alien, her name still unknown to him, pulled him back. Her grip was strong, her movements decisive. She led him away from the fire, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of danger. Riley followed, trusting her instincts. They were outnumbered. They couldn't win. The realization hit Riley like a punch to the gut. The creatures were too many, their movements too coordinated. This was a battle they couldn't hope to win. Not here, not now. This was a fight they couldn't win. The soldiers' faces were grim, their eyes filled with determination. They knew the odds were against them, but they would fight to the last. The desert night was filled with the sounds of battle, the screeches of the creatures, the shouts of the soldiers, and the crackle of plasma fire. Not here. Not like this. Riley's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. They needed a plan, a way to escape the swarm. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but it was their only hope. They had to find a way to survive the night, to live to fight another day. They ran, the creatures chasing them. Riley, breathing hard, could hear the chittering getting closer. He looked back quickly. The creatures, their eyes glowing with an evil light, were catching up. The taller alien suddenly changed direction. She ran towards a narrow crack in the rock, moving quickly and confidently. Riley hesitated. Trusting someone was hard, especially in this wasteland. But he had no other choice. He followed, squeezing through the narrow opening just as the creatures reached them. The passage led to a small hidden cave, safe for now. The alien, breathing hard, looked at him for the first time. Riley saw something like gratitude in her eyes. They were strangers, forced together in this harsh place, but tonight they were allies, working together to survive.